So the Rainbow Unicorn Party have just released their route map to get us through and out of this so-called crisis, quote unquote. You know, the crisis that could have been prevented in theory by closing the borders when they had the opportunity to. Instead of that, they still remain open to this day, and we're all under house arrest. But nonetheless, we'll come on to that in due course. So the Rainbow Unicorn government's website has the following: our path out of COVID-19 lockdown, what you need to know, or in other words, what they want you to think you know, by Olaf Stando, the very informative Olaf Stando, who has the cliche "my views are my own" on his Twitter bio, as well as being an anti-racist, environmentalist, and a socialist to boot, but yet he writes and supports quite openly and avidly for the SNP. Kind of gives you a bit of an insight into who we're dealing with here when it comes to the so-called Scottish Nationalist Party. However, the Scottish Government's route map for easing COVID-19 lockdown restrictions sets out 4 phases for moving out of the lockdown, with progress assessed every 3 weeks, and they get to determine whether or not progress has been achieved. And of course, if they, with their faceless experts behind the scenes, declare that we've not gone far enough, or things aren't moving fast enough, or if there's a resurgence of this so-called virus, then we have to go back to square one. And this is going to continue to go on and on and on with this tyrannical shit that's occurring right in front of your face until such a time as we end up with some vaccine that Matt Hancock couldn't even say when he was asked, well, whether or not it would be mandatory. He just hopes that the public will be on board with the idea. But you know, if enough don't end up being on board, then rest assured they will find a way to make it mandatory. But I digress. The phases are gradual and based on careful monitoring of the virus, guided by scientific advice. Of course, hand-picked scientific advice, because there's a whole world of differing opinions out there and differing experts, but they don't want to talk about those experts. They want to rely on the United Nations little World Health Organization and the likes of the CDC and Dr. Fauci in America. You know, all the fear porn gurus. The current advice remains to stay at home except for essential purposes, because for some reason essential purposes means you're exempt from contracting said virus, as if you decide to break the rules that have been put in place and you go out for something that's classified as not being essential, then you're in danger. Such as essential work that can't be done from home, exercise, and buying essential supplies such as food and medicine. You know, going out for food and supplies such as medicine means that you're less likely to contract the virus if you go out rather than go out to buy a tin of paint, you see. And as for exercise, you know, Scotland recently decided to lift the ban on going out once a day. You're allowed out more than once now. There's a deadly virus out there, but it's not so deadly that you can go out more than once now to quote exercise. Yeah, okay. Here's what you need to know. Yeah, just a couple of things that have been coming out in the news today. You know, sturgeon. Employers should consider 4-day working week. You know, the First Minister said we shouldn't slip back into an old and bad way of doing things as the economy recovers from COVID-19. Using COVID-19 and the so-called need to repair our economy as their excuse for all these things they had in the pipeline previously. It's not like the SNP themselves in 2019 were debating a 4-day working week. It's not like that wasn't in the pipeline already. And don't even for one split second sit there and think to yourself that this is Nicola Sturgeon and her little Rainbow Unicorn team thinking up all these things off their own accord. This is them taking the initiative. Oh no, because the likes of New Zealand are coming up with identical policies to this. And let's not beat around the bush. This whole bollocks about easing out of this lockdown because we can't just go right back to normal because that destroys the narrative. But it's identical to Westminster's near enough. Anyway, I mean, realistically, what could be that much different?
Be able in this first phase to sit outside or sunbathe in parks or other open areas, and as long as you stay 2 metres apart, you will also be able to meet outside with people from another household.
2 metres apart. More bollocks from Nicola Thinlips. As it says here from the World Health Organization, who she loves to parrot, maintain at least 1 metre, 3 feet distance between yourself and others. Or what about Germany, who seems to have their own version of social distancing rules, which equate to 1.5 in metres. Or we could talk about the fact that some are saying there's no evidence to suggest it works, some are saying that it was conjured out of nowhere, and going by Thinlips and her 2 metre rule, going by Germany and their 1.5, and going by the World Health Organization that says 1.3, it stands to reason there's something not right here. Could be argued it is conjured out of nowhere. And other experts, of course, are calling for the whole thing to be scrapped because there's no evidence to suggest it works in the slightest. Is no 5-mile travel limit to see your parents. Scotland is on track to begin easing the lockdown from next Thursday, but Scots should use their judgment. Discussing changes likely to begin from the end of the next week. Thin Lips asked Scots to use their judgment when planning to meet other households. As an example, she suggested that if you're having to travel a long distance to visit relatives that you need to use the toilet in the house, you shouldn't visit them. There is a risk if you are infectious of leaving the virus on their surfaces, but if you have to go somewhere that's 4 miles away, don't worry about it. 5 though? Oh, you're at risk of spreading the virus, you see. Fuck you, Thin Lips. Go and F yourself. Anyway, the first phase will enable meeting up with members of another household outdoors with physical distancing measures in place, as well as the reopening of garden centres, drive-through food outlets and household recycling sites, also allowing for more outdoor activities such as sitting in parks. Oh, it's so great. We can sit in the park. It's not going to spread the virus anymore. It did previously, but because they've said it won't now, you're allowed to sit in park benches again. You know, one golf, travelling short distances, broadly within 5 miles. 6 is a taboo, 4 is fine, but 5, for outdoor leisure and exercise will also be permitted by Nicola Sturgeon. She's telling you what you can and can't do. You know, but something I forgot to include before we go forward. When I was referring to they have things in the pipeline that they couldn't implement previously, but now they're doing it. Take a listen to this clip quickly. This is what I'm talking about.
The crisis has impacted literally on every aspect of life, the economy and society, and we're going to have to methodically and systematically and carefully work our way through how we fix the impacts where it's done damage and where we change how we do things in the future. So I don't have all of the answers to that right now, and I think Parliament would rightly be a bit miffed if I stood up here and tried to give you all of the answers to that right now. But just as we did at the outset of this crisis to put in place the protection against eviction, as we move into a different phase, we will have to consider what protections are appropriate for a longer term period and what bigger changes we want to see. Actually, everybody in this chamber has a part to play in that, as have the entirety of the Scottish population. I would never, ever have wished the circumstances in which we're having these discussions, but it is undoubtedly the case that it gives us an opportunity to change things for the better, and that's something I'm determined to try to do.
Oh, how convenient! Just fell on your lap. All the things you wanted to start doing, but you weren't too sure how to do it without the public's backing. Just fell on your lap, this so-called crisis, didn't it? How convenient, Sturgeon. How very convenient. Anyway, so Scotland's route map through and out of the so-called crisis. So let's get a little look at this, shall we? We have a little introduction here from Commander Thin Lips, and she goes on to say that too many people have lost their lives to this disease already, and we cannot risk another peak. You know, flu season being and gone. But anyway, most importantly because that would mean more deaths, but also because it would mean another lockdown. Oh, we can't be having that now, can we? But let's not forget here, as I keep repeating, 23,000 people, plus 23,000 died in Scotland in 2017 to 18 due to influenza and pneumonia, and around 2,000 people have died in Scotland due to what they claim is COVID-19, but around half, if not more than half, of those people that have died were in care homes, giving you a grand total of the outside population to around 1,000 deaths. And how many of that 1,000 are actually COVID-19? Because, as I've provided on this channel, and I'm sure you're aware of from other sources, they are flubbing the statistics. Sturgeon admitted this by allowing doctors to classify a death as being attributed to COVID-19 based on nothing other than a doctor presuming they had it to begin with. And how did they come to these presumptions? Well, because of symptoms that are similar to COVID-19. Problem with that, though, is the symptoms to COVID-19, they're near enough identical to things such as influenza and pneumonia. And now they've extended the symptoms to things such as a loss of smell and a loss of taste, you know, identical symptoms to that of hay fever. And what starts at this time going forward? Hay fever. Wouldn't you know? Anyway, our society is facing the biggest challenge of our lifetime, with the way in which we live our lives significantly restricted by our lockdown rules. The virus continues to pose a serious threat to public health in Scotland, based on what exactly? The Scottish Government is doing everything it can to suppress the virus, and we've done such a great job. It's now managed to find its way onto the Isle of Skye, for example. It's managed to find its way in droves into our care homes, but we're getting a handle of it, yeah. Anyway, a second surge in infection would cause further harm to our health, society and economy. To judge whether and when restrictions can be changed, we will consider a range of evidence in the progress of the so-called pandemic in Scotland. And where's your evidence to suggest there would be a second outbreak? I'm not saying that there wouldn't be, but that stands to reason, considering it looks rather likely like COVID-19 is a winter flu, that there won't be a second outbreak. Hence why the cases are starting to dry up now as we move into the warmer months. As transmission of the virus reduces as a result of effective responses, see there they go again, they are taking the credit for why the transmission in the virus is supposedly on the decline. How can these people sit there and come away with this with a straight face? Or more importantly, how do people listen to this and buy into it? In a lockdown, we think it was between 4 and 6, so there is real and very positive progress. We've also seen our estimate of the number of infectious people, currently 25,000, start to fall in recent weeks. It is vital that we keep the R number below 1 and see the number of infectious people continue to fall, as if not, the virus will quickly spread again. They don't know this! And second of all, you don't even know the R number! You fucking people, man! It's ridiculous! And what about all the recoveries? No mention of that though, of course. An increase beyond 1 would risk exponential growth in the number of cases, hospitalisations, deaths, causing very significant harm to Scotland's health, society and economy. That's funny because in its peak there was still a shit ton of hospitals that had the capacity to fill up these beds. What happened to the newly built temporary hospital in Glasgow? Empty as at thin lips. Why's that? Anyway. However, too many people are still dying, and the situation in care homes where most of the deaths are occurring, despite the extraordinary dedication of our care workers, remains a serious concern, so we have to be very cautious in our approach to transitioning out of lockdown. You have based a lockdown on the amount of deaths in this country, supposedly, and of course, over half of the deaths in this country have come about due to deaths in care homes. Take them out of the equation and base this lockdown on the rest of the people that have died due to this so-called virus. It looks a bit ridiculous. It looks ridiculous anyway, but even more so. There is some evidence that the current R number in Scotland is slightly above that elsewhere in the UK. Some evidence, but not enough for you to know what it is. Through comparative estimates depending on models used and are subject to a significant degree of imprecision and variation over the new data over time as new data becomes available. If the R number is higher, and perhaps reflects the fact that our first cases came later than England and so maybe at a different and slightly earlier stage of infection curve. Different population characteristics of Scotland relative to other parts of the UK, such as age structure and population density, will also affect the measurement of the R. That's great, but you still don't know what it is. Anyway. The Rainbow Unicorn government has taken decisive action to address the pandemic, imposing measures to restrict public gatherings, business activity, and requiring people to stay at home unless it is absolutely essential to go out in order to protect public health and, of course, protect the NHS. The health protection coronavirus restrictions Scotland regulations 2020 came into force on the 26th of March to allow enforcement of those measures in recognition of the threat posed to public health from the coronavirus, the threat that they claim is as prevalent as they claim it is. It's debatable. The regulations, unless amended, will expire after a period of 6 months from the date they entered into force. They placed unprecedented restrictions on the movement of people and the operation of businesses across Scotland and have a huge impact on Scotland's way of life. Due to the extraordinary nature of the restrictions placed on our society, ministers have provided for a statutory review of the need for restrictions and requirements contained in the regulations. Such a review must take place at least once every 21 days. But of course, this bit here, where it talks off after a period of 6 months from the date they entered into force, unless they are amended, so they have the opportunity and the ability to amend them if they so choose. And considering they're the ones that claim the threat as prevalent as it is, they, rest assured, will if they wish. The First Minister set our intention to be open and transparent. Fuck off. COVID-19 is first and foremost a public health crisis that we created ourselves, and the measures to combat it have been necessary to save lives. But those measures also cause harm and can have the most negative impacts on some people in our society, least able to withstand them. We are learning that the harms caused by the pandemic are not felt equally. Oh, here we go again. Response to the pandemic must recognise these unequal impacts, just as we have sought to shield those most at risk, which have failed miserably considering the care homes. We must continue to provide additional support for those who need it and seek to advance equality and human rights, aka the UN's laws, including children's rights and everything we do. Children's rights. Right, okay. The effects of increased isolation could be particularly severe for elderly people, people living alone, and people who require support. Harmful effects in the economy can also impact hardest on families with low incomes and people who already experience the effects of inequality, intersectionality and all that. For example, the impact fucking hell, come on, for women who take the disproportionate share of caring responsibilities, paid and unpaid, means they're likely to experience particular disadvantages. Of course, it affects women the most. Means they are likely to experience. This will also be a significant issue for other groups already disadvantaged in employment terms, particularly disabled people, minority ethnic groups, and some other groups with protected characteristics. You know that group, that list of protected characteristics that they created themselves? That's playing into this shit about intersectionality. So before they created this list, everybody was affected equally, but now they've created a little tier system, their intersectionality list. And if you've got one or more of these protected characteristics, you are by default, purely for the purpose of being on said list, more likely to be affected disproportionately. Fucking people, man. Our framework for decision making makes clear that the way we approach the COVID-19 crisis, quote unquote, aims to protect those most at risk and to protect human rights, to protect those most at risk. So people are getting priority over everybody else, as per usual. And I wonder who these people could be. Well, going back to the previous point, where regarding ethnic minorities and fucking women, the measures currently in place are legally required to be lifted as soon as it is considered they are no longer necessary. Well, it's not now really. To prevent, protect against, control or provide a public health response to the incidence or spread of the virus in Scotland. These considerations aligning with our overarching commitments to human rights, equality and social justice will be at the centre of thinking as we consider options to relax restrictions. Get these people out of this. Oh, Jesus, man. There is a balance of harms to weigh up in easing, or retightening any restrictions. Public Health Scotland and collaborators have recently published a paper on the risks of distancing measures negatively impacting on people's health and how to mitigate these wider harms. It finds that the interventions in place to lower transmission of the virus can themselves cause a wide range of harms, and that building a more sustainable and inclusive economy for the future will be crucial to mitigating these wider harms. A sustainable economy. We need to implement the Sustainable Development Goals in order to mitigate the harms that come from this so-called virus. In Scotland, there are approximately 170,000 people shielding. Around half are over 65 years old, and 14% are over 80. A quarter of those shielding live in the most deprived areas of Scotland. Structural inequality causes damage to our society, as the impacts of COVID-19 have highlighted. But the way we have responded to it as a society is showing that there are ways to do things differently. Whoa, you people, man. Problem, reaction, solution. I'm telling you, man. Our homelessness response focused on ensuring everyone experienced homelessness and had a home in which they could safely self-isolate, and practice physical distancing. Local services have developed a new and innovative approach to reach children in their homes, including regular telephone and online contact, as well as practical and emotional support. Our approach to free school meals, working with local authorities, has shown that very large numbers of children and young people from low-income families can be supported in a range of ways via a cash-first direct finance payment approach. We will take the chance as we emerge from this period to chart a better way forward in support of all of Scotland. As we move forward, we want not simply to return to where we were, but to build on the innovative responses seen through the so-called crisis to build a fairer Scotland. Now, let's not forget though, for years I've been covering this, and for years the SNP have been repeating this trope of a fairer Scotland. And where does that come from? It comes from the United Nations. All this talk of leaving no one behind, all this talk of a fair, socially just world. Are people not starting to put two and two together here and realise where this is all coming from? What the fuck has a fairer Scotland got to do with stopping or preventing the spread of a virus? They are restructuring our society, or the government's purpose in it anyway, reshaping our lives and pretending it's for our own good. We will use the lessons learned during the pandemic to help us make progress towards our long-term outcomes that you already had, of lower poverty levels, greater equality and inclusive communities by diversifying them and respecting an enhanced realisation of human rights, the UN's laws. Our decisions in the coming weeks and months will aim to do just that. I can't wait. And I realise this video is starting to get too long, so I'm not going to go through all of it. I'm going to read through a little bit more, then I'll get down their phases, if you will. This route map takes evidence-led and transparent approaches to easing restrictions and sets out a phased approach towards the future. Inevitably, this will be a future which will not just pick up where we were before this pandemic, but will be marked by the experiences we have been through. Now, take that and compare it to the previous points that I've read through. They're talking about how this moving forward, a socially just or a fairer Scotland, a sustainable Scotland, etc., etc. Now, going back to the way things were would mean we wouldn't be living in a fairer Scotland, a sustainable Scotland. They're using this as the remit to move into this fairer Scotland, this sustainable Scotland, if you will. As we move forward over the coming months, we will recognise the impact of the virus has not been the same for everyone. Although everyone has been affected, we will take an approach that takes us steadily towards the objectives and outcomes set out in the National Performance Framework, which came out before the virus. The route map provides an indication of the order in which we will carefully and gradually seek to lift current restrictions, but does not attempt to specify dates for all the different phases, so they get to dictate when things move forward, if and when things move forward, and if we need to regress. See how this works. And of course it says here, as we move beyond the first phase, future phases will be based on meeting particular criteria, including those set out by the World Health Organization, the same World Health Organization that said back in January time that this couldn't be transmitted human to human, the same World Health Organization that said that this would have a mortality rate of over 3%, which has since been proven to be utter bollocks. We will continue to take a cautious approach that ensures that the virus remains suppressed while seeking to restore as much normality as possible when it is safe to do so, and they dictate when it will be safe to do so, if and when. We will continue to hold reviews every 3 weeks or whatever. The annex provides a table, yada yada, whatever. To progress from phase 0 to phase 1, we will need to have seen evidence of transmission being controlled. This would include the R number being below 1 for at least 3 weeks and a number of infectious cases starting to decline. Evidence of transmission being controlled would also include a sustained fall in supplementary measures, including new infections, hospital admissions, and the deaths for at least 3 weeks. Assuming no regression in our progress so far, we believe these conditions will allow a move into phase 1 from the 20th of May. Our test to protect system will be in place at the end of May to support a move to phase 1. To progress from phase 1 to phase 2, we would need to have seen the R number consistently below 1 and the number of infectious cases show a sustained decline. The 6 criteria for easing restrictions must also be met. We will be working closely with the UK government and the United Nations, of course, or the WHO, and Bill Gates, to ensure that the 5th criteria is met. Now, of course, the 6 criteria or elements of the criteria for easing restrictions from the World Health Organization says the following. Evidence shows that COVID-19 transmission is controlled. Sufficient public health capacities are in place to identify, isolate, test and treat all cases and to trace quarantine contacts. Outbreaks risks are minimised in high vulnerability settings such as long-term care facilities. Done a great job there. Preventive measures are established in workplaces with physical distancing, hand washing facilities and respiratory etiquette in place and potential thermal monitoring. Manage the risk of exporting and importing cases from communities with high risk of transmission. Done a great job there. Communities have a voice, are informed, engaged and participatory in the transition. Well, of course, only if they agree with this nonsense, because you've ignored the protests, you've ignored the demands from people that want this lockdown to end, you've ignored the people that feel that the cure is worse than the disease itself. Oh, no, but you'll listen to Big Boy Sustainable Bill, you'll listen to the UN and the World Health Organization, you'll listen to folk like that, of course. So if the public are on board with that and they parrot demands that you yourself have kind of preempted them to say previously, then of course you'll take their voices seriously, and if they're black. Then it goes on to say, now I've skipped past phase 1, if you will, because we've already been through this already with this lockdown that we're in. So phase 2. To progress to phase 2, the virus must now be controlled. VAR must be consistently below 1, and we don't know what it is currently, but hey-ho. And the 6 WHO criteria described above must now be in place. Any sign of resurgence will be closely monitored as part of enhanced community surveillance, but the risk of spreading the virus remains. During this phase, future changes are made to ease the restrictions in place and further assumptions or expansions of public services are made. These rules set out in the previous phase apply except as set out below. Seeing family and friends. In phase 2, you would be able to meet outside with large groups, including family and friends, with physical distancing, of course. You would also be able to meet people from another household indoors with physical distancing and hygiene measures. In phase 2, consistent with the reopening of workplace set out in this phase, it is our plan that the default position is for people to work from home where possible. Where that is not possible, businesses and organisations encouraged to manage travel demand through staggered start times and flexible working patterns. People will be able to drive locally for leisure and exercise purposes. Planning for public transport operations increased services, but capacity would still be significantly limited to allow for physical distancing. Travel at peak times would remain discouraged as far as possible. Schools and childcare. In phase 2, we are planning for on-campus university lab research to research subject to physical distancing. In phase 2, remote working should remain the default position for those who can. Indoor non-office based workplaces can resume once relevant guidance has been agreed, including factories and warehouses, yada yada. We are planning for the construction industry to move out to later phases of its sectoral restart plan. That's great, finally I can go back to work. Shopping, eating and drinking. We expect previously closed small retail units will be allowed to reopen with physical distancing, of course. Physical distancing itself gets a mention. Pubs and restaurants can open outdoor spaces with physical distancing and increased hygiene routines, of course. Keeping this routine going for as long as possible. Phase 2, planning to reopen of playgrounds and sports courts with physical distancing. Wow. Scaling up of public services from phase 1 where it's safe to do so. In phase 2, and they get to determine when and where it's safe to do so. In phase 2, we plan for registration offices to open for higher priority tasks. Places of worship will be able to open for private prayer with physical distancing, of course. Remobilisation plans will be implemented by health boards and integrated joint boards to increase the provision for the backloaded demand, urgent referrals and the triage of routine services. This phase will see the reintroduction of some chronic disease management, which can include pain and diabetic services. Prioritised referrals to secondary care will begin. We will expand the range of GP services and see an increase in the availability of dental services. There will be an increased number of home visits to shielded patients. Okay. Phase 3 will begin to feel closer to normal. The virus will have been suppressed, and test and protect working across Scotland means we will understand where any additional local measures might be required. Many workplaces will already have adopted with physical distancing the norm. Communities will be fully engaged and participating in the transition back to a more open life and economy. This phase has a significant number of changes which impact many people, and the planned changes may need to happen over more than one review cycle of the regulations. By this stage, you'll be able to meet with people from more than one household indoors and physical distancing and hygiene. I mean, this is just nonsensical. If there is a virus out there that we have to avoid and suppress, etc., etc., we're currently at war with a virus that's really deadly, apparently, right? Well, then surely meeting with anybody from any household should be a taboo. But yet, by this point, or the phase that we're going to be entering now, phase 2, we will be able to meet with people from another household. So it's okay to meet with people from another household, but it's not okay to meet with other people from separate households or more than one household until they say it's fine. This is ridiculous. It's either around us and everywhere, or it's not. In this phase, you can drive beyond your local area for leisure and exercise purposes. This is great. Okay, I go back to my previous point. So, before they determine whether or not it's safe to go beyond your local area for leisure and exercise, you're allowed, during phase the one we're going into, you'll be able to go to your local areas for leisure and exercise purposes, right? Okay, but you can't go further than your local area because that risks spreading the virus. It's ridiculous. It's fucking... we are planning for children to return to school under a blended model of part-time in-school teaching and part-time in-home learning. Public health measures, including physical distancing, will be in place. Of course they will. Of course they will. Bear in mind, there is schools that are open currently. My cousins down in the Central Belt, they're in school. Not on top of that, there's kids that are in school whose parents are classified as essential workers. So why is it okay for them to be in school, but not okay for other kids? What, are they exempt and immune from catching it, are they? We are planning for all childcare providers to reopen subject to public health measures with availability prioritised to support key worker childcare, early learning and childcare. We are planning for a phased return for universities and colleges with a blended model, yada yada. I mean, phase 3 is more or less the same as the phase 2, but just expanding it ever so slightly. For example, pubs and restaurants can open indoor spaces with physical distancing and increased hygiene routines, of course. And then things such as museums, galleries and cinemas can open subject to physical distancing and hygiene measures. And it goes on and on and on like this, but I mean, I realise my video is starting to get too long. Phase 4, in this final phase in our transition through this non-existent crisis, because the borders were and still are open, this virus remains suppressed, to very low levels and is no longer considered a significant threat to public health. Now bear in mind, this is going to come back again in the winter. So you've got to understand, when you compare this crap to what they were saying in the previous documents that I've covered, at a moment's notice we have to go back into lockdown. It's coming again. This is the new normal. All criteria continue to be met. A vaccine and or effective treatment may have been developed. Test and Protect continues to be fully operational in all 14 health boards, and Scotland is open with precautions, and the importance of hygiene and public health are emphasised, of course. Seeing family and friends. We will expect to see further relaxation of restrictions on gatherings, and the continued importance of hygiene and public health will be emphasised. Schools and childcare. Schools and the childcare provision would be operating with any necessary precautions. You get the idea. It goes on to say, there's also a strong sense of people taking responsibility and expecting that of their fellow citizens. So even if you don't believe in this shit, you have to go along with it because other people will be expecting that of you, you see? And of the balance between asking the government to ease the restrictions on their freedom and a commitment to taking personal responsibility for their role in controlling the virus. This is just the beginning of our discussions with the people of Scotland, not the Scottish people, the people of Scotland. The World Health Organisation and their strategy for transition emphasise that communities have a voice, are informed, engaged and participatory in the transition. That's great, but going back to the previous point, about 10 minutes or so ago, in relation to certain people being more affected than others, combined with the fact that they also claim they're going to do more to protect the certain people or certain characteristics, if you will, or group classified as having certain characteristics. They're going to do more to protect and help them because they're disproportionately affected. Now you combine that further with the comment here about communities having a voice. But whose community voice will be heard the loudest and valued the most? Well, it's the ones that are all labelled as being disproportionately affected. Now who are they? The protected groups, etc. Anyway. We have also been engaging with a wide range of stakeholders, including third sector organisations, the Equality and Human Rights Commission and the Scottish Human Rights Commission, the Children and Young People's Commissioner of Scotland, the Poverty and Inequality Commissioner and the Poverty Truth Commissions we support across Scotland to understand the impact of the lockdown measures on human rights, including children's rights and people at risk, particular risk of negative impact from them, such as women, children, older people, disabled people and minority ethnic communities. So every single group of people in this country bar able-bodied white men. What a fucking shock that really is. Coming from the Scottish Government. Are you surprised? I'm not. Regular virtual roundtables have also been taking place with stakeholder groups to ensure we are hearing the latest intelligence on emerging impacts and the issues people are facing. This dialogue is feeding into our consideration of how to phase the easing of lockdown restrictions. And I'll leave the link to this, but I mean, the video's getting too long. I don't even know if people will continue watching it to this long, so I could be talking to myself. But nonetheless, the aim of this document is to provide a sense of direction as we learn to live with and hopefully eradicate this virus. Hopefully eradicate this virus, but learn to live with it, yeah. To be clear, in every phase, that hard work will include hard work, my fucking arse. Regular hand washing, appropriate cough and sneeze etiquette, being acutely aware of the symptoms of the virus that you're continuously expanding, engaging with the test and protect system and isolating if you have the virus or someone you have been in contact with has had it. And how do you know they've got the virus when you expand the symptoms repeatedly? And being acutely aware of the symptoms of the virus means that if you think you've come down with one of the many symptoms that they're continuously adding to, you have to isolate yourself. There will be times like now where progress feels slow. Sometimes that will be out with our control. For example, if we learn new things about the virus or we make more things up. Sometimes it will require us to double down in our compliance with the rules. Our compliance double down. You know, this whole thing would fall flat on its face if we didn't have a bunch of idiots in this country. And yes, I mean the fools walking around in face masks and walking in the middle of the road to avoid people walking towards them. We cannot rule out having to take a step backwards if the virus is starting to spread more rapidly again. You fucking people, man. We will also need to keep each of the phases constantly under review as we learn to live with the virus and see the impact that the suggested changes made. Ultimately, we will start to return to normal, or a new normal. We will spend more time with our family and friends when we say so, without using a screen. Visit our favourite cafes, pubs and restaurants and see our businesses grow and innovate. Innovate being the operative word, because this is what this is about. The businesses that are able to stay afloat come the end of all of this, they will only be able to do so by innovation. And what do you think that will entail? Well, of course, other social distancing measures, etc., but for a more sustainable, equal society with human rights at its heart. Green, diverse. Is words ringing any bells? We have seen how this virus has impacted most on our poorest communities, bringing into sharp focus our inequality impacts in every aspect of an individual's lives. Well, again, you could have done things to mitigate poverty in this country, but you pissed it away on non-existent man-made climate change funds and everything else that I've repeated several times. The crisis also put at risk many industries and jobs, and we will have to work to support businesses to innovate to recover, so they won't be able to come back the way they once were. And of course, what it says here, to a Scotland which is greener, fairer and more prosperous. Now, fairer
it comes down to, or equates to, equal. Now, what does equality mean in the eyes of the Scottish Government and all the people they work with, including their social justice advocates and the stakeholders? They mean equity. Yes. We're going to have a fairer, greener, equitable Scotland, a sustainable Scotland. In the short term, we will need to do more locally to support businesses, build more local supply chains, use local skills, and build local demand. This will give us a strong platform to turn ourselves back towards the rest of the world. Yeah.